Hello and welcome to our program, Where God Weeps, a program where we speak about the situation of the suffering church around the world. Approximately 10% of Vietnam's population of 90 million is Catholic. For a greater part of the 20th century, the communist-led government held strict control over the Catholic life, seizing properties and limiting vocations. In 2005, there was a loosening of the grip of the government, enabling greater freedoms. This sadly, however, and the hope that it has brought, is fading as a consequence of a decree established in 2013 called Decree 92. To tell us more about the life of Catholics in Vietnam, as well as the impact of Decree 92, it's my great privilege to welcome Father Bernardo Cervellera, the director of a Catholic news agency here in Rome called Asia News. Father Bernardo, thank you for being with us here today on our program.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
Father Bernardo, you have been a number of times to Vietnam. Can you tell us, how do you feel now, particularly the economic or the lifestyle of the people in Vietnam and the country? How is it developing?
But the country is developing quite well because there are many investments from abroad, and there are some limitation in the economy which have been cancelled by the government. So many foreigners are going there. The life level of the people is also increasing, above all in the countries, in the cities. The point is that with the cities becoming richer, there are many problems for poor, first of all, because they become poorer and poorer, and secondly, because there are many migrants who come from the countryside to the cities. So there are a lot of social problems. Lot of family destroyed, divided, prostitution,
alcoholism and drug use.
Yeah, all these things which are typical of migration towards urbanization.
Now a little bit to the religious landscape. The Catholics, of course, have had a little bit more freedom since 2005, but it's coming to be clamped down again. We'll get to that in a minute, but can you give us a little bit of an idea of what is the religious landscape now in Vietnam?
Religious landscape is quite rich, I would say, and quite lively also, because for the Catholic Church, I would say that all the churches are always full. There are a lot of activities and a lot of communities who try to help these poor, who try to face these problems of women in the prostitution field, and also medical help is very strong towards poor. Education also, education towards children, above all kindergarten, is very important for sisters who work in this field, and are very important because the consumerist society, the ex-communist society and consumerist society has become almost void of any value. So the education of the children, education of the family, education and helping the poor has become one of the main roads for the evangelization.
In 2005, as we mentioned, the communist government loosened, or let's say perhaps not abandoned, but gave ground in its ideological struggle against religions. Why was this, and what freedoms did the church start to be able to enjoy as a consequence of this change?
If I remember well, the change was because Vietnam was attempting to enter into the international community, the WTO, and so they wanted to present themselves in some way as with an acceptable face in the international community. Also, it was important in the Asian community, that is the countries of the Southeast Asia, because the theme of human rights were very strong. And there was a strong condemnation of Myanmar, which was in a worse situation than Vietnam. So there was, in some way, an attempt to save its own face, changing something. I would say the changes were giving, for example, to the church or to the Buddhist, to the official Buddhist church, more freedom to have more activities. But the control has never stopped.
So it was more or less a cosmetic change?
I think so.
Yeah. For example, bishops were and still are not allowed to freely travel.
It's absolutely terrible, this one. First of all, the activities of the communities must be planned long time before, and you have to ask for permissions. Secondly, the bishops, if they go around in their diocese, in their own diocese, they have to ask for permission. If they go abroad, they have to present a report, what they will do, what they will say, and so on. So it's absolutely crazy. Means that these bishops practically are like children.
Like prisoners almost.
Yeah, they are prisoners.
And what about a priest? What about a young man who wants to become a priest? What obstacles, for example, would he have to overcome?
This one has become a little bit better, because before there was a closed number to the seminaries. Now this number has been increased. But this is because the Catholic bishops in Vietnam, they promised that if they don't open the seminary number and don't increase the number of the seminarian, they would have ordained underground priests. And the government was worried about this. So in the seminary there is a little bit of freedom. There are also professors who teach, but from the point in which a seminarian becomes a priest, he has to go into the organization of control. What is good, we can say, in Vietnam, much diverse comparing with China, is that the community, the Catholic community in Vietnam is united around their bishop. And so there is not the patriotic association and the Catholic faithful on the other side, but there is a united community.
Having said this, these, let's say, certain freedoms, even if they were cosmetic, there is still arbitrary violence against Christians. There is still imprisonment. There is still violence. Do you know of some cases, of some examples that you can give us to give us a picture of what kind of arbitrary?
We have to say something about 2 or 3 problems that affects the church and the society in Vietnam. First of all is the freedom of speech and the freedom of expression. Means that a Catholic blogger or people who write on internet or produces associations which are not controlled by the government, all these people, they go to prison. And so there are Catholic bloggers, Catholic lawyers who have defended Christians for some events like clashes with police. The Catholic or the Christians defending, for example, church land in Vinh, in Hanoi, and in other part of Vietnam. There has been such a big stealing of properties. And we have to say that these manipulation, these violences happen no more because of ideological enmity towards the church, just because of greed. Because of greed means that the member of the Communist Party,
he sees something, and
they see something which can be useful for their own richness, and they steal from the church, they steal from the Catholics, they steal from the Protestants, they steal from the Buddhists, from everything, from every community.
Are there regions, however, for example, in the highlands, the Montagnards, are there regions where Catholics suffer greater persecution? The Montagnards, I believe, are an ethnic group, and therefore there's also an additional problem there. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
It is the Montagnards have a double persecution in some way. One persecution is because most of them, they are Catholic and Protestants. The second reason is because they are minorities, ethnic minorities. These ethnic minorities, which comes from Polynesian roots, they are not well integrated with the Vietnamese ethnic group, which is the majority in Vietnam. And so, because they have a very simple life in the forest with the survival agriculture and so on, they've been pushed on the borders of the country. They are deprived from their land, and secondly, they are not given any help from the point of view of medical help, any help from the point of view of school, all these things. So they live in a very low-level situation. This is, and why this? Because during the Vietnamese war with the US, the Montagnards, hoping to have some more freedom, they supported the US, at least some of them. They supported the US. But now the point is that after more than almost 40 years, I think, from the 60s and up to now, almost 40 years, the Montagnards are suspected to be enemies of the state. So they are continuously persecuted from a political point of view, but also from a Catholic and Christian point of view, because the priests, they cannot go there to celebrate Mass. Sometimes churches are destroyed. If a bishop wants to build up a chapel or build up a dispensary or build up a small school, they are not allowed to do it. So their situation is very
difficult,
bad.
very difficult. In January 2013, a new law was put into place on religion and religious activities called Decree 92. It has now again restricted the activities of Catholics and Christians in Vietnam. Can you tell us what is this Decree 92 and why was this reimposed now at this time?
It is practically an explanation of the law, which was the new law on religion, which was implemented in 2005, I think, or 2005. So it is just an explanation of these things in which they explain what are the permissions which must be asked for some activities, what are the permissions for some building the churches and so on. So it's just a more detailed way of controlling the communities. Not only, I would say, not only the Catholics, but also Buddhists, they have a lot of problems because in the Buddhist stream, there is one Buddhist church which is, how can I say, which accepts the control of the government, but there is another one which doesn't accept, which doesn't accept the control of the government, and among these people there are also persecuted persons, monks.
So it's not so much a new law; it's simply a confirmation of what was already existing. However, in fact, what was implicit is now down in black and white. Doesn't now in black and white. The point is that anyway, the bishops still, they cannot move freely in their diocese. The priests, they cannot do all the activities they want. In fact, the Catholic Church and the bishops, they criticized very strongly and very openly this new document. This new document. Would you say, although Vietnam doesn't, like China, China has the official church and the division between the official and the underground church, but would you say Vietnam is following China in its footsteps in terms of its treatment of Catholics and Christians, or can you not make that comparison?
I think so. There are some similarities.
For example?
For example, the first similarity is on the evolution of the society and the evolution of communism. In China, from communism, we have arrived now to the socialism with the Chinese characteristic, which means a very heavy and wild capitalism, in which the party has the power and the people doesn't have any power at all. Now, this path is also the one followed by the Vietnamese Communist Party, which now has a lot of political power, lot of economic power, and there are, as I was telling, many investments from abroad, so they are very rich. And they try to become richer and richer. In this way, they have to control more the population, because this population, they don't have any say, and they don't have any economic power to face these people. This is why the church must be more controlled. In this particular sense, I think that China and Vietnam, they are the same. They are on the same way.
Because the church is the only remaining authority to stand up and say, what is happening is...
in some way it is. That is, the church is, I think it has become more and more, also in these years, it has become the only authority who says you are doing something wrong, because you say you are not giving the right to the people, you are not giving the medical help to the people, you are not doing a very patriotic work. This is very interesting, because in these 2 years, the church has become the defender of the Vietnamese identity, because the Communist Party of Vietnam wanted to have good relationship with China, so they let China build up some bases in the Spratlys Islands, giving up the sovereignty of Vietnam. Secondly, they gave concessions for mines in central Vietnam. And third, Communist Party in Vietnam, they allowed Chinese to take many parts of the economy, of the Vietnamese economy.
It's interesting.
The church in Vietnam has said, but you are destroying our economy, our sovereignty, and our freedom, selling it to the Communist Party in China.
And is there the intellectual capacity within the Vietnamese population to understand what's going on?
Oh yeah,
absolutely.
There have been many demonstrations in Saigon and in Hue, with thousands of people from the entire Vietnam asking for the stressing of the value of the national identity of Vietnam. And among these there are Catholics, but also Protestants, Cao Dai, which is another sect, Buddhists, and everything.
Which brings us to the question, why, if we understand that religious freedom is a human right, and we are always talking about human rights, is the international community in its economic dialogue with Vietnam not putting this human right on the table and saying what is going on in Vietnam with regard to the religious freedom, with regard to the human rights? This topic in our diplomatic language has disappeared from the table.
Yeah, sure. This is a
perhaps I'm naive and
common situation all over the world.
Yes.
Means that because of the economic crisis, because of the greed of financial corps, it is those who invest in Vietnam, they don't mind at all about human rights and about freedom of religion. The point is that they want stability, and they think that the iron fist of the government is enough to maintain stability. My impression is that an iron fist cannot last forever. So sooner or later, they have to, in order to have peace and stability, they have to take care of freedom of religion and human rights. If not, there will be war.
Notwithstanding all of these pressures, notwithstanding all of these challenges to the Catholic Church, to the Christian community, there is a flowering of the faith. There's an extraordinary number of vocations, for example, to the seminary in Wien. I think it's a record number. So we see, how do we understand this now? There's greater pressure, and yet the church is growing and growing.
On one hand, there is a certain tradition of martyrdom. The martyrs in Vietnam they are producing a lot of fruits in the community. Secondly, because people, they see around them a lot of corruption, a lot of stealing, a lot of anarchy, a lot of political power who are not defending the people. They see in the church, in the gospel, a light of truth. So they go there. Above all, youth. The youth, which of course are tempted by consumerism and richness, but there are also youth who decide to follow Jesus Christ and also to become priests or a religious person.
Does this give you hope for Vietnam and the
Vietnam? For me, Vietnam is one of the main pillars of the evangelization of Asia, because there are young Vietnamese priests who go to Taiwan, who go to Japan, who go to Indonesia, who go to Hong Kong, and they work not just for the Vietnamese community there, but for the church and for the evangelization in these countries.
Which brings us to the question, what can we do? How can we help the faith grow in Vietnam?
But of course, prayer for them is the first thing. Secondly, to keep in touch with this community. Keep in touch means that we should have a kind of communion, a kind of friendly relationship, in order to be in some way edified by their witness, which is very important for us, for example, in the West. And to learn from them that even if there are very small spaces, but the faith can flourish.
Father Bernardo, thank you for having been with us today in our program.
Thanks to you.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for having been with us today on our program, Where God Weeps. And if you'd like to know more about the story of Catholics in Vietnam, or perhaps how you might be able to help, I would encourage you to look at the contact information at the end of this program. And we look forward to seeing you next week. Take care.